There is a conversation I have had hundreds of times in my consulting room, and it always begins the same way. Someone sits down across from me, usually a man or woman in their 60s, sometimes older, and they describe, with a mixture of frustration and resignation, the same experience. They changed what they eat. They cut the bread, reduced the portions, started walking every morning. And the belly didn't move, not a centimeter. It sits there, hard and distended and utterly indifferent to every sacrifice being made around it, as though it belongs to a completely different body than the one making all the effort. They have blamed their metabolism, their hormones, their age, and I understand why. These are the explanations that have been offered to them repeatedly by a medical system that rarely looks at the one place the real answer tends to be hiding. Well, I'm Dr. Naira Stein, Senior Health and Wellness Consultant, and what I want to offer you today is not another calorie calculation or another exercise prescription. What I want to offer you is the explanation that most people never receive, the one that actually accounts for why the belly stays exactly where it is, regardless of what is happening on the plate. And alongside that explanation, 6 specific research-backed compounds that address the problem at its actual source, taken together each morning in a single tablespoon ritual that costs almost nothing and requires less than 5 minutes of your day. Stay with me. What we discuss today has the potential to change the trajectory of something you may have been fighting for years. Let me begin where the real story begins, not in the stomach, not in the fat cells themselves, but 4 feet lower, in the gut. Inside your digestive system right now, there lives a community of approximately 38 trillion microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, and other microbes, collectively called the gut microbiome. This community is not passive. It is metabolically active, producing hormones, neurotransmitters, and signaling compounds that influence everything from your immune system to your mood to the way your body decides what to do with the calories you consume. And one of its most consequential functions, one that almost no one discusses in the context of belly fat, is its direct role in determining whether your body stores fat or burns it. The balance within your gut microbiome is not fixed. It shifts based on what you eat, how you sleep, the medications you take, and the stress you carry. And when that balance tips in a specific direction, when fat-promoting bacterial strains come to dominate over fat-burning ones, the biochemical environment inside your gut begins producing inflammatory compounds that send a continuous hormonal signal to your body. Store fat, particularly around the abdomen, and hold on to it regardless of what arrives at the plate. There is also a second layer to this that most people have never considered. Years of suboptimal diet, reduced digestive motility, and gut microbiome imbalance can result in impacted waste accumulating in the colon, material that adds genuine physical girth, poisons the bloodstream with reabsorbed toxins, and creates a condition of chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation that accelerates every mechanism driving belly fat storage. No amount of caloric restriction touches this. It requires a different kind of intervention entirely. I want to tell you about a patient before we go any further, because his story is the most efficient illustration of everything I just described. He was 66 years old. He ate well, genuinely well, not as a matter of perception, but as a matter of documented food records he brought to our first appointment. 2 years of clean eating. No processed food, no sugar, no alcohol. Flat everywhere on his body except for a hard, distended belly that had not changed in all of that time. His previous doctor had checked his thyroid, his testosterone, his cortisol. Everything came back within normal range. The belly remained. I ordered something his previous doctor had never considered: a comprehensive gut microbiome panel. What it revealed explained everything. His ratio of Firmicutes to Bacteroidetes, the 2 dominant bacterial phyla in the human gut, whose balance is one of the most important predictors of metabolic health, was completely inverted from what it should be. His colon was dominated by fat-promoting bacterial strains that were producing inflammatory compounds around the clock, signaling his body to maintain its abdominal fat stores regardless of what he was eating. Additionally, his colon showed clear evidence of significant impacted waste accumulation that had been building for years. I gave him 6 compounds to take together every morning, 1 tablespoon. Nothing else changed. Same diet, same activity level, same everything. 4 weeks later, his waist measurement had reduced by 3 inches. His chronic bloating had resolved. He was experiencing regular daily bowel movements for the first time in years. His follow-up microbiome panel told a story of complete reversal. The fat-promoting bacterial strains had been significantly reduced, and the fat-burning strains were now dominant. The belly that 2 years of clean eating had never touched had finally begun to yield, because for the first time, the actual source of the problem was being addressed. These 6 compounds work through 2 mechanisms simultaneously. They feed the bacterial strains that shift the microbiome toward fat burning, and they starve the strains that have been driving fat storage. And they support the removal of accumulated intestinal waste that no diet alone can address. We will move through them from effective to extraordinary. The 3rd compound produced a shift in the gut bacteria ratio so rapidly in a clinical trial that the researchers retested the participant samples, convinced there had been a laboratory error. The first compound is one that most people have either overlooked entirely or are using incorrectly, which means they are receiving a fraction of what it is capable of delivering. Ground flaxseed. Freshly ground, not prepackaged, and this distinction matters more than almost anything else in the preparation of this morning ritual. Flaxseed contains both soluble and insoluble fiber in a ratio that makes it uniquely valuable for gut repair. The soluble fiber, when it meets the fluid in your digestive system, forms a slow-moving gel that serves multiple simultaneous purposes. It slows the absorption of sugars from food, preventing the blood glucose spikes that trigger insulin release. And insulin, as the primary fat storage hormone in the human body, is the single most important hormonal variable in the belly fat equation. When insulin rises sharply and frequently, the body's default response is to store fat, particularly in the visceral abdominal region. Ground flaxseed, by moderating those glucose spikes, reduces the insulin signal that has been instructing your fat cells to hold on. A 2020 study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition followed 123 participants consuming daily ground flaxseed for 12 weeks and found a 15% reduction in abdominal bloating, alongside measurable shifts in gut bacteria toward more beneficial species. Separate research from the University of Copenhagen documented a 22% reduction in gut inflammatory markers within 8 weeks of daily flaxseed consumption, attributable to its alpha-linolenic acid content, which is one of the richest plant-based sources of omega-3 fatty acids available. The lignans in flaxseed function as prebiotics, feeding existing beneficial bacterial populations. A Toronto research team documented increases of 28% in lactobacillus populations and 34% in bifidobacterium within 6 weeks of daily use. The preparation error that eliminates most of these benefits is buying pre-ground flaxseed. Ground flaxseed oxidizes rapidly once the outer hull is broken, losing its most active compounds within days of grinding. Whole flax seeds, by contrast, pass through the digestive system entirely intact, providing no benefit whatsoever. The correct approach is to grind whole flax seeds in a coffee grinder immediately before use, consuming the ground product within 10 minutes. 1 tablespoon in water, in a smoothie, stirred into yogurt, all work equally well. An additional full glass of water alongside it is not optional. The expanding fiber requires adequate hydration to move correctly through the digestive tract, and without it, the result is the opposite of the intended effect. The second compound connects one of the most ancient medicinal plants in human history to some of the most precise modern metabolic research available. Fresh ginger, grated, not powdered, for reasons the science makes clear, contains bioactive compounds called gingerols and shogals, whose effects on both belly fat and gut function are documented across dozens of peer-reviewed trials. A 2019 meta-analysis in Critical Reviews in Food Science and Nutrition synthesized the findings of 27 clinical trials involving over 1,600 participants and concluded that ginger supplementation produced significant reductions in body weight, waist-to-hip ratio, and fasting blood sugar. The average waist circumference reduction across trials was 1.8 centimeters over 12 weeks. In the context of visceral belly fat, which is metabolically distinct from subcutaneous fat and far more resistant to conventional intervention, this is a meaningful change attributable to a single morning compound. The thermogenic mechanism is particularly elegant. Gingerols increase the heat-producing activity of metabolically active tissues, a process called thermogenesis, in ways that a 2012 Columbia University study calculated as adding 43 additional calories burned per meal through the thermic effect of food alone. Across 3 daily meals, that represents 129 additional calories burned daily, without any change in activity, accumulating to nearly 3,900 extra calories over a month. For gut function specifically, research from the University of Michigan demonstrated that gingerol reduced intestinal inflammation markers by up to 28% within 30 days, directly addressing the inflammatory environment that keeps visceral fat entrenched. Fresh ginger root grated on a fine grater delivers gingerol concentrations up to 3 times higher than powdered ginger, making the form of preparation a genuine variable rather than a matter of convenience preference. 1 tablespoon of fresh grated ginger steeped in hot water for 5 to 7 minutes, consumed on an empty stomach, is the preparation that most closely mirrors what the clinical research actually used. Ginger roots, stored unpeeled in the freezer, grate more easily than refrigerated roots and remain potent for months. The third compound is the one I want you to pay particular attention to because the speed and magnitude of its effect on gut bacterial composition in clinical conditions was striking enough that researchers questioned their own results. Ceylon cinnamon, and the specification of type here is not a minor detail, it is essential. Cassia cinnamon, the variety found in the overwhelming majority of grocery store cinnamon products, contains significant concentrations of coumarin, a compound that at daily doses causes measurable liver stress. Ceylon cinnamon contains roughly 250 times less coumarin, making it the only form appropriate for the daily use we are discussing. A 2019 study in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics administered 1 tablespoon of Ceylon cinnamon daily to 60 adults with metabolic syndrome for 8 weeks. Fasting blood sugar fell by 17%. Waist circumference decreased by an average of 1.3 centimeters. The mechanism centers on cinnamaldehyde, the primary bioactive compound in cinnamon, which mimics the cellular effect of insulin, enabling glucose to enter cells more efficiently and reducing the demand placed on the pancreas to produce the large insulin surges that drive fat storage. A 2017 study from the University of Michigan went further, demonstrating that cinnamaldehyde directly activates human fat cells to express genes associated with fat burning rather than fat storage. This was not a suppression of fat accumulation. It was an active reversal of the cellular program maintaining it. For the gut microbiome specifically, the clinical trial data that produced such striking results involved cinnamon's selective antimicrobial activity. A 2020 study in Frontiers in Microbiology found that cinnamaldehyde reduced populations of Clostridium difficile and E. coli by up to 75% in experimental conditions, while simultaneously promoting lactobacillus growth by 19%. This selectivity, harmful bacteria suppressed, beneficial bacteria promoted, is something broad-spectrum antibiotics are incapable of achieving. Ceylon cinnamon is available through online retailers and specialty health food stores. The label should specify Cinnamomum verum or Cinnamomum zeylanicum. If neither name appears, assume it is cassia. The fourth compound is one whose reputation in the wellness space has perhaps become so familiar that people have stopped actually hearing what the science says about it, which is a genuine loss because the specific evidence for its effect on the gut-belly fat axis is among the most robust on this entire list. Turmeric, combined with black pepper, consumed with a small amount of dietary fat, addresses the inflammatory feedback loop that keeps visceral fat physiologically locked in place. Visceral fat is not passive tissue. It produces inflammatory signaling molecules called cytokines that activate a cellular pathway called NF-kappa B, which instructs neighboring cells and distant tissues to maintain the conditions for ongoing fat storage. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Inflammation promotes fat retention. Fat retention produces more inflammation, and the cycle continues regardless of caloric intake. Curcumin, the primary active compound in turmeric, inhibits NF-kappa B activity at the molecular level, breaking the cycle at its hinge point. A 2016 study in the journal Biofactors measured an average reduction in C-reactive protein, the primary systemic marker of inflammation, of 6.44 milligrams per liter in participants consuming curcumin. When inflammation drops at this magnitude, the hormonal environment shifts, cortisol decreases, insulin sensitivity improves, and the belly fat that has been physiologically maintained by inflammatory signaling begins to release. For the gut microbiome, a 2020 randomized controlled trial in the journal Gut found that curcumin increased microbial diversity by 7% within 8 weeks. And microbial diversity is, by consensus among gastroenterologists, the single most reliable indicator of gut health. Research from the University of Illinois documented a 40% increase in tight junction protein expression in intestinal cell cultures exposed to curcumin, directly addressing the intestinal permeability that allows gut toxins to enter the bloodstream and trigger systemic inflammation. The bioavailability preparation is non-negotiable. Curcumin consumed without piperine, the active compound in black pepper, is largely eliminated before it reaches the bloodstream. The 2,000% absorption increase documented in phytomedicine when piperine is added is the difference between a compound that circulates at therapeutic concentrations and one that is wasted. A pinch of black pepper alongside 1 tablespoon of turmeric mixed into warm water or golden milk with a small amount of olive oil or coconut oil constitutes the complete delivery system the research actually used. The fifth compound is the one that most directly addresses the physical accumulation of intestinal waste that no dietary change alone can resolve, and whose documented effect on gut function is so consistent across clinical evidence that a 2020 systematic review in the British Journal of Nutrition, analyzing 35 independent clinical trials, described it as more effective at improving overall gut function than any other fiber supplement tested. Psyllium husk. When 1 tablespoon of psyllium husk powder meets the fluid in your digestive system, it expands to 20 times its original volume, forming a thick, slow-moving gel that travels the entire length of the digestive tract, drawing impacted material with it and sweeping intestinal surfaces that other fibers never reach. In the same systematic review, psyllium reduced constipation symptoms in 84% of participants and improved stool consistency in 92%. A 2018 study in the journal Obesity documented a 3.2% reduction in trunk fat mass over 16 weeks in participants consuming psyllium daily, arising from a mechanism distinct from any other compound on this list. As psyllium gel passes through the small intestine, it captures bile acids and carries them out of the body in waste. The liver, needing to replace those bile acids, draws on circulating cholesterol to synthesize new ones, and in the process, redirects its metabolic resources away from lipogenesis, the manufacturing of new fat. The belly fat mechanism is interrupted not by restricting calories, but by redirecting the liver's metabolic attention. A 2019 study in Cell, Host, and Microbe found that psyllium increased short-chain fatty acid production in the colon by 37%, with butyrate, the primary fuel for colonocyte cells lining the colon wall, rising most significantly. When the colon's cellular lining is well fueled, its barrier integrity is maintained, toxin reabsorption is minimized, and the systemic inflammation that this toxin reabsorption drives is correspondingly reduced. Preparation is simple but timing sensitive. 1 tablespoon stirred vigorously into 12 ounces of water must be consumed immediately, as the gel forms within 30 seconds of contact. First thing in the morning, 30 minutes before eating, followed by a second full glass of plain water. Beginning at half a tablespoon for the first week prevents the temporary gas and cramping that can accompany a sudden increase in fermentable fiber for someone whose gut is not accustomed to it. The sixth and final compound sits at the top of this list for a reason that is not based on tradition or anecdote, but on a specific, landmark, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial whose results placed it among the most clinically validated natural interventions for visceral belly fat in the published literature. Apple cider vinegar, raw, unfiltered, with the mother culture intact, attacks belly fat through 3 distinct pathways simultaneously, while simultaneously creating a gut environment that favors the beneficial bacterial strains whose dominance determines metabolic outcome. The 2022 trial I reference frequently in clinical conversations enrolled 175 obese adults divided into 3 groups: 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar daily, 2 tablespoons daily, or placebo for 12 weeks. No dietary changes, no exercise protocols, no other interventions. The 1 tablespoon group lost an average of 2.6 pounds of total body weight, with imaging confirming 3.7 pounds of visceral belly fat specifically. The 2 tablespoon group showed greater losses. The placebo group showed none. These results came from a single daily tablespoon of something available in any grocery store. The primary active compound, acetic acid, activates AMPK, the enzyme referred to in metabolic research as the master metabolic switch, in both liver and muscle cells. When AMPK is active, fat oxidation increases and fat production decreases simultaneously. A 2014 study in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry measured a 10% increase in fat oxidation in liver cells following acetic acid exposure. A 2004 study in diabetes care documented a 34% improvement in insulin sensitivity in insulin-resistant participants who consumed vinegar before a high-carbohydrate meal, meaning the glucose that would otherwise have been converted to fat was instead absorbed efficiently by cells. And research from Sweden's European Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that vinegar consumption increased satiety scores by 55% 2 hours after eating, reducing the caloric intake that follows a meal without requiring any conscious restriction. The mother culture, the cloudy, thread-like substance in unfiltered apple cider vinegar, contains living Acetobacter bacteria that contribute probiotic activity to the gut environment. A 2018 study in microorganisms documented that acetic acid creates an upper digestive tract environment selectively hostile to harmful bacterial overgrowth while supporting lactobacillus and bifidobacterium colonies. Research in the International Journal of Medical Sciences found a 23% improvement in digestive symptom scores within 4 weeks of daily use. 1 tablespoon in 8 ounces of room temperature water, consumed 15 to 20 minutes before the first meal of the day, through a straw to protect tooth enamel. This is the preparation the clinical evidence supports. Always diluted, never consumed straight, as the acetic acid concentration in undiluted vinegar is sufficient to damage esophageal tissue. I want to close today by returning to the man who sat across from me with 2 years of clean eating behind him and a belly that had not moved. His story is not unusual. It is, in my experience, far more common than the medical system's standard approach to abdominal weight acknowledges. The gut was always involved. The microbiome was always part of the picture. The impacted waist, the inverted bacterial ratios, the inflammatory compounds producing a continuous hormonal signal to hold fat in place, these were always the mechanisms driving what diet alone could never reach. 6 compounds. Ground flaxseed, feeding the beneficial bacteria while sealing the gut lining. Fresh ginger, igniting thermogenesis and calming intestinal inflammation. Ceylon cinnamon, reversing the cellular fat storage program through selective microbial action and blood sugar regulation. Turmeric, with black pepper, breaking the inflammation feedback loop that keeps visceral fat physiologically locked. Psyllium husk, sweeping the colon clean while redirecting the liver away from fat production. And apple cider vinegar, raw, unfiltered, with the mother, activating the master metabolic switch and creating a gut environment where beneficial bacteria can finally take back the ground they lost. 1 tablespoon of each every morning before the day begins. Not a dramatic overhaul, not a program that demands perfection. A consistent, compound, daily act whose effects accumulate in the gut microbiome, in the hormonal environment, and in the belly itself, quietly and inexorably shifting the balance back in your favor. Your gut has been waiting for exactly this kind of attention, and now, for the first time, you know precisely how to give it.